Welcome back to Morgan's video blog, Morgan's online blog in video format. Today I come to you from NaNoWriMo Eve, but by the time you see this, it will likely be NaNoWriMo. Today's discussion, making the words come a writer's struggle. All writers work differently, but since I started with NaNoWriMo, I've come to look at it as my kickoff season. Even if it takes me months and months after Nano to actually finish the story, not to mention editing, revising, and querying, I can at least get to the 50,000 word mark, usually. When it comes to daily word targets, like NaNoWriMo encourages, I've run the gamut. For those of you who don't know, NaNoWriMo sets the monthly goal at 50,000 words, which is about 200 pages. It's a bit short for a novel, and it breaks down to 1,666 words, which is about 6 pages. So when you set out and you see this goal, how do you get started? You gotta pick a pace. Now, I've failed NaNoWriMo, I've won NaNoWriMo by the skin of my teeth, and in one glorious November, I finished 75,000 words. Different stories, different voices, and different points of view will write faster or slower for you at different times. Some writers wait for the spirit to be upon them and crank out 30,000 words in a sitting. Some write 5 or 6K on all the days on the weekend and try and squeeze in a couple words else times. That might be you. Me, not so much. As I've talked about before, I am not a sprinter. I'm a marathoner through and through. Fortunately, 1,666 words is usually achievable for me. With the right story, I can even hit 2,500 words in a day. But I can only do it one way, by writing every day. If I wait until the weekend to sprint, I'm doomed. I have never written 2 nano days worth of words in a single day, ever. If I get more than 1 or 2 days behind, there's literally no way for me to catch up. Left on my own when it's not November, I typically set my own personal word count goals or weekly goals. But my writing pace, fit in around my day job and my life, is approximately half the speed of a nano. In November, I can clear things out, but they can only slide so long if I still want them to be part of my life. And I do. So that's why my pace slows down outside of November, even though I can achieve those pages. Now, if you've never NaNoWriMo'd before, or you've thought about it and it just hasn't worked out, it can seem daunting. And it feels like there are just people who can commit and do it and people who can't. And that maybe, they start off trying and getting closer, and once you've made it, you can always do 50,000 words. Sorry to tell you, that's not true. Just because I hit NaNoWriMo sometimes and win by hitting that 50,000 word mark at midnight on November 30th doesn't mean I always win. Let me talk to you about my past nano history, my sordid past. I have rebelled with half nanos and spent a November editing instead. I've started to draft a sequel to a previous book and it petered out. My first NaNoWriMo win was my 3rd attempt at writing the same story. The setting changed, the point of view changed, but it was the same story. 2 years ago, I did that magical 1.5 nano in November, but it was a sequel, so I knew the world and the characters and how the magic works. Plus, my life was pretty settled that month. Last year, I started a new job. I actually outlined because I was doing a Robin Hood variant, and I barely squeaked out the words, probably because I was too constrained. But anyway, when my life is settled, I can commit and focus, and that's what it takes for me to win NaNoWriMo. Which brings us to this year's NaNoWriMo. This year, I've got a rough, very rough outline that I need to revamp for the age range I'm aiming for. My story involves school-age children dealing with parents, so that means it should be aimed at middle grade or younger. Children read down very rarely. They like to read stories about kids older than them or their own age. And YA stories are typically coming-of-age stories, or at least stories involving adventures without adults, or, with them interacting with adults as peers. So in preparation, as I suggested last week, I've already created a list of 50 names that fit in my world so I can just grab and go when I'm writing. Left to my own devices, picking a name for a character can take longer than my daily allotment for writing. But placeholder names don't really work for me either. Remember that nano and a half I told you about? It's filled with 30 placeholder names and sitting as a rough draft in my Google Drive. No offense, but Alice, Bob, Carol, and the invaders from Canada don't really fit my fantasy world aesthetic. I gotta admit, it feels pretty daunting to fix, so I'm gonna avoid that sort of placeholder name in the future. But despite my preparations, I still have a few obstacles. One, I have never written for this age range before. I'm not familiar with the story pacing or any of that stuff. Secondly, I've never written a story in this world. I have a new contemporary fantasy thing going on, so I'll be having to think about the intricacies of how the magic interplays with the world as I write. Third, I have a day job and it has deadlines coming up, so that really has a large potential to eat into my writing time. And finally, instead of middle grade, this might end up being a chapter book, and those are typically about 20,000 words if I want to sell it, if I want an audience. And if that's the case, what do? Do I write 2 novels? Do I start a series? Do I need to cut my plot, or can it fit in that few words? Or do I hit 20K and call it a day because the story's done? I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll just have to find out. Because for me, the only way to find out what happens to these cool half-formed characters in my head is to write it. Thanks for tuning in for Morgan's writing tips and writerly musings, and tune in again next week. As always, feel free to subscribe or comment below. And a special note, if you're going to World Fantasy Con this weekend, I will be there. I will be attending panels. I will be working in the con suite. And as my panel debut, I will be on a panel with Guy Gabrielle Kay, Jessica Elbert, and Simon Vance. We'll be discussing audiobooks, making fantasy real. We'll also be discussing some of the differences between audiobooks and podcasting, and maybe even some video vlogging since I'm up there. It will be at 5 p.m. in the Homeland Conference Room on Saturday. I hope to see you there. If you do run into me, let me know where I know you from and what name I might know you under, and I'd love to meet you all. See you there, or see you next week. Bye-bye.